The room was alive with quiet anticipation as Jasmine Crockett prepared to discuss Donald Trump's statement on the Epstein files. Cameras clicked, microphones hovered, and journalists leaned in. Everyone had their own expectations. Some were curious to see if she would challenge the former president, while others expected her to simply clarify the confusion surrounding the statement. Jasmine, however, had a different goal: to break down the facts in a way anyone could understand. She wanted clarity, not controversy. She opened her tablet and scrolled through the official statement carefully, reading it silently before speaking. The room fell quiet as she looked up, her eyes calm yet firm. "Before we discuss opinions, we need to understand the facts," she began. Her voice was measured, authoritative, and inviting. She highlighted that the statement had several claims, some of which were public knowledge and others that referred to sealed documents. She didn't exaggerate or speculate. She simply explained what was verifiable and what remained confidential. Jasmine started with the legal basics. She explained that certain files related to Epstein's cases were sealed to protect ongoing investigations, privacy, and legal processes. Many people assumed the absence of information meant something was being hidden intentionally. But Jasmine clarified that legal systems often withhold information as a procedural necessity. By breaking it down in simple terms, she made a complex issue accessible to everyone in the room. From young students observing to seasoned analysts. Next, she focused on the statement itself. She read key excerpts aloud, pausing to explain the context behind each one. She pointed out phrases that were designed to reassure the public, phrases that maintained legal neutrality, and phrases that invited speculation. "This isn't about taking sides," she said. "It's about understanding the language used, why it matters, and what it actually tells us." Her tone was calm, guiding, and meticulous. She wanted the audience to see beyond sensational headlines and online commentary as she spoke. The room's energy subtly shifted. People stopped reacting emotionally and started listening analytically. A journalist who had come expecting a confrontational debate leaned forward, intrigued by the clarity of her approach. Another commentator, usually dismissive of such discussions, scribbled notes rapidly, realizing that Jasmine's method allowed them to see nuances they had overlooked. The conversation was no longer about defending or attacking. It was about understanding. Jasmine then addressed the timeline of events. She summarized publicly available court documents, dates of filings, and the process by which certain documents had been sealed. She emphasized that timelines are critical to understanding statements in context. If you don't know when documents were released or sealed, it's easy to misinterpret any public statement, she explained. Using simple examples, she likened it to reading a book out of order. Skipping chapters can make a story confusing or misleading. But understanding the sequence restores clarity. The soft cliffhanger arrived naturally. After explaining the timeline and procedural nuances, she paused and asked, "So, the statement is taken at face value. What does it actually reveal, and what does it leave out?" Her question wasn't rhetorical. It invited the room to reflect. Some audience members murmured to each other, others nodded slowly. Even the media professionals realized that this was more than just a reading of facts. Jasmine was setting the stage for critical thinking to further anchor her point. She contrasted public perception with reality. Online discussions and social media threads often amplified assumptions or misinterpretations. Jasmine highlighted that a single statement can be interpreted in hundreds of ways depending on the lens applied. She encouraged listeners to pause, verify, and think critically before forming conclusions. "Our responsibility," she said, "is not just to react to statements, but to understand them in context." By the end of Part 1, Jasmine had established control of the conversation without confrontation. She had broken down legal jargon, explained procedural processes, and highlighted the importance of timelines. She didn't push an agenda or make speculative claims. She guided the audience to a foundation of understanding. Everyone in the room was now prepared for the next stage, analyzing different viewpoints, weighing interpretations, and exploring the social and emotional layers of the issue. The first part concluded with a sense of anticipation. Jasmine's careful, fact-driven approach had drawn the audience into a thoughtful space, shifting attention from speculation to clarity. Questions were forming in their minds. What does this mean for public perception? How do statements like this influence trust? And, most importantly, how can people separate facts from opinion in a highly charged political and social environment? In those final moments, Jasmine reminded everyone why facts matter first. The room seemed to collectively acknowledge that understanding the statement itself was the essential first step. Only after that could they discuss interpretations, implications, and consequences responsibly. The stage was set, the audience engaged, and the debate, tempered by clarity and careful reasoning, was ready to move to its next phase. After laying the groundwork with facts, Jasmine Crockett shifted the discussion toward perspectives and interpretations. The room, once silent with anticipation, now hummed with curiosity. Journalists, analysts, and observers leaned in, ready to see how she would address the heated debates that had surrounded Trump's statement on the Epstein files. She knew that opinions varied widely. Some believed the statement was misleading. Others saw it as a factual clarification, and her goal was to dissect both sides without taking a partisan stance. She began by inviting contrasting viewpoints. A journalist critical of the statement outlined concerns about selective disclosure, arguing that omitting context could mislead the public. Another commentator, known for defending political figures, emphasized that the statement adhered to legal procedures and should be interpreted as such. Jasmine listened carefully, nodding to acknowledge each perspective before turning the conversation to analysis. She wasn't trying to refute anyone. She was guiding the audience toward clear, reasoned thinking. Both sides make valid points, Jasmine said, her tone calm but firm. The question is, how do we evaluate the statement for ourselves, using facts rather than assumptions? She emphasized that context and process were key. She reminded the audience that public statements often serve multiple purposes: informing, reassuring, and managing perception. Recognizing this complexity doesn't require agreement or disagreement. It requires understanding. Jasmine broke down the statement line by line, comparing the words with official documents, publicly available court filings, and procedural norms. She highlighted where the statement aligned with verifiable facts and where it left gaps, explaining that gaps aren't necessarily deceitful. They often reflect legal constraints, privacy considerations, or timing issues. Her analysis was precise, but her language remained simple. She wanted everyone, regardless of their background, to follow the logic clearly. To make the concepts relatable, Jasmine drew analogies. She compared reading the statement to receiving a weather report. The report provides information about temperature and conditions, but it can't tell you the exact moment it will rain or the precise wind gusts at every street corner. Similarly, a public statement reflects certain verified facts, but may omit details that are confidential or irrelevant to the broader audience. This analogy helped observers understand why conclusions drawn solely from statements could be incomplete or misleading. She then addressed timing and sequence. Many online debates ignored the order in which events had occurred or documents had been released. Jasmine explained that understanding the chronological context was crucial. A statement made months after filings may reference facts differently than a statement made in real time. She illustrated this with simple timelines, showing how perception can shift based on what is known at a particular moment. Her visual examples drew nods from attendees, clarifying why misunderstanding often arises in public discourse. Next, Jasmine emphasized the importance of critical thinking. She didn't lecture. She prompted reflection. When you see a statement like this, ask yourself, what is confirmed? what is missing, and how could context change interpretation. She paused to let the question sink in. The audience responded subtly, some scribbled notes. Others exchanged thoughtful glances. She encouraged the listeners to separate their emotional reactions from analytical reasoning, framing evaluation as a skill rather than a debate tactic. She then explored the media's role. Jasmine acknowledged that news coverage, social media threads, and commentary often amplify assumptions. Media framing can shape public perception, sometimes faster than facts themselves, she said. She encouraged the audience to compare multiple sources and to recognize bias without assigning blame. By addressing both media influence and public reaction, Jasmine demonstrated that understanding statements requires awareness of context, communication, and social dynamics. To illustrate her points, Jasmine used neutral, practical examples. She described a company issuing a public notice about a product recall, comparing it to the Epstein file statement. Just as the notice communicates essential facts while omitting sensitive internal details, the statement provided selective information to the public. This analogy allowed the audience to see that selective disclosure can be procedural and necessary, not necessarily deceptive. By the midpoint of Part 2, the room's energy had shifted from tension to engagement. Observers were no longer focused on assigning blame. They were thinking critically alongside Jasmine. She had taken the debate from polarizing rhetoric to structured analysis, demonstrating how to evaluate statements factually and responsibly. Everyone understood that the discussion wasn't about defending or attacking, but about clarity, comprehension, and responsible judgment. Jasmine concluded the segment by summarizing the key lessons. Verify facts independently. Consider context. Analyze what is stated and what is omitted, and recognize the role of timing and framing. She left the audience with a subtle, thought-provoking cliffhanger. Understanding the statement is only the first step. The next step is considering how this information affects people, decisions, and public trust. Invited reflection, signaling that the debate would move beyond facts into emotional and social implications in the next part. The audience left Part 2 with a new perspective. They could see that polarized opinions often stemmed from incomplete understanding. Jasmine had not dictated conclusions. She had equipped the listeners with tools to navigate complex information critically. The stage was set for Part 3, where the discussion would deepen into the social and emotional layers of public statements, exploring how clarity and perception influence trust, empathy, and public dialogue. After dissecting facts and perspectives, Jasmine Crockett shifted the focus to the social and emotional layers surrounding the Epstein file statement. The room's atmosphere changed subtly. It was no longer just about statements and legal processes, but about the human impact behind them. She began by acknowledging that public figure statements reach far beyond official circles. They shape public perception, influence emotions, and affect real lives. Jasmine reminded the audience that Epstein's cases had already left a trail of victims, families, and advocates who followed each development closely. While some people debated the statement's political meaning, these communities were watching to see justice handled carefully. She emphasized that statements like Trump's, even when legally accurate, carried weight in shaping public understanding and sentiment. Words have power, she said, her voice steady. And how information is presented can either clarify the truth or confuse those who depend on it. To illustrate, Jasmine shared examples of how statements can be misinterpreted. She explained that when parts of a legal process are confidential, media and social media users often fill the gaps with speculation. She described it like a puzzle with missing pieces. Without all the context, the final picture is distorted. But understanding what is verified, what is procedural, and what remains unknown helps people form informed perspectives rather than jumping to conclusions. Her analogy resonated with everyone. It simplified a complex legal and political issue without diminishing its importance. Jasmine then turned to the emotional aspect of public reaction. She noted how outrage, frustration, or support often arises before facts are fully analyzed. She explained that these emotional responses are natural. People care about justice, fairness, and accountability, but unchecked, they can lead to misinformation or unnecessary conflict. She encouraged critical reflection, urging the audience to pause before reacting online or in conversation. It's okay to feel, she said, but it's also essential to think and verify. That's how we balance empathy with accuracy. Next, Jasmine explored the role of public trust. She explained that statements by prominent figures influence how people perceive institutions and legal processes. Trust can be strengthened when communications are clear, factual, and transparent, but it can erode quickly when statements are perceived as misleading or incomplete. Her point was not to critique anyone personally, but to highlight the responsibilities inherent in public communication. She emphasized that citizens, journalists, and commentators also share responsibility in interpreting information responsibly. She then invited a brief discussion among the attendees. People shared their experiences with interpreting public statements in everyday life, from workplace memos to news reports. Jasmine guided these conversations back to the Epstein files example, illustrating that the same principles: verification, context, empathy, and critical thinking apply whether the information is legal, political, or personal. She used this engagement to reinforce her main message. Understanding statements requires both analytical and emotional awareness to make the concept tangible. Jasmine compared navigating public statements to attending a community meeting. Imagine the organizers can't share every detail due to privacy, legal, or procedural reasons. Attendees may feel left out, frustrated, or anxious. The challenge is to acknowledge those feelings while also understanding why certain information is withheld. This analogy helped the audience relate emotionally to the people affected by Epstein-related developments. Without sensationalizing or politicizing the issue, Jasmine also highlighted the social implications of discussion and debate. She reminded the room that conversations about statements often ripple into communities online and offline. Misinterpretation can polarize opinions and create tension between groups, while informed dialogue can foster understanding. She encouraged listeners to consider not only what is said, but how it affects those around them. Her tone balanced logic and empathy, showing that critical thinking and social awareness are complementary, not opposed. By the end of Part 3, the audience had moved from analyzing facts to understanding the human side of the statement. They saw that public discourse involves more than verification. It involves responsibility, empathy, and reflection. Jasmine didn't instruct them what to believe. She equipped them to consider both the emotional and social context while maintaining a commitment to accuracy. She concluded the segment by posing a thought-provoking question. Now that we understand the facts and the perspectives, how do we ensure our interpretations respect both truth and those affected by it? The room was silent for a moment, each attendee reflecting on their role as informed participants in a broader conversation. This pause set the stage for the final part, where Jasmine would tie together facts, perspectives, and social understanding into practical takeaways for responsible engagement. By carefully bridging analytical reasoning with emotional awareness, Jasmine had transformed what could have been a polarized debate into a learning moment. Attendees left Part 3 with tools to assess statements critically, appreciate context, and consider consequences. Preparing them for the final segments focus on clear takeaways and forward-looking guidance. As the discussion entered its final stage, Jasmine Crockett focused on drawing together the threads of fact, perspective, and social understanding. The room, once filled with curiosity and speculation, now held a thoughtful quiet. Everyone had listened, reflected, and engaged. This was the moment to turn clarity into practical insight, helping people navigate not just statements about Epstein's files, but any complex, emotionally charged public issue. Jasmine began by summarizing the factual foundation. She revisited the key points. The statement contained verified facts. Some context was necessarily omitted due to legal confidentiality, and timelines were essential to understanding its intent. She reminded everyone that knowing the difference between what is confirmed and what is speculative is the cornerstone of critical thinking. Her words were concise, easy to follow, and unifying, creating a sense of shared understanding in the room. Then she transitioned to perspectives. She highlighted the diversity of viewpoints expressed earlier, from those who viewed the statement skeptically to those who accepted it as procedural correctness. Both perspectives are part of a healthy conversation, she explained. The goal isn't to convince anyone to take a side, but to understand why these perspectives exist, what they emphasize, and how they shape public interpretation. She illustrated that being aware of multiple viewpoints allows people to engage more thoughtfully in discussions, preventing snap judgments or miscommunication. Next, Jasmine addressed the social and emotional dimension one last time. She emphasized that statements like this influence feelings of trust, empathy, and accountability. People's reactions often stemmed from concern for justice, fear of misinformation, or personal experiences. She reminded the audience that recognizing emotions doesn't conflict with analytical reasoning, it complements it. By considering both emotional impact and factual accuracy, individuals can respond responsibly in their communities, online discussions, and professional environments. To make this tangible, Jasmine gave practical guidance. She suggested a simple three-step approach for evaluating public statements. First, identify verified facts and distinguish them from speculation. Second, understand context, timelines, and procedural constraints. Third, consider the social and emotional implications for affected communities. This method empowered attendees to navigate complex information without bias or oversimplification, emphasizing understanding over judgment. She also addressed the broader importance of communication. Public figures, the media, and citizens all play roles in shaping discourse. Jasmine reminded everyone that responsible interpretation involves active listening, fact-checking, and patience. She illustrated this with examples from other high-profile cases where incomplete information led to confusion, contrasting them with instances where clear, factual communication maintained trust and encouraged constructive dialogue. Her tone was balanced and encouraging, showing that everyone could contribute to healthier public conversations as she spoke. Jasmine encouraged reflection on personal responsibility. She challenged the audience to consider how they consume information, discuss sensitive topics, and share opinions. We all participate in public dialogue, whether we realize it or not, she said. By approaching statements critically, empathetically, and patiently, we influence not just our understanding, but the collective understanding of those around us. This message resonated. People nodded, scribbled notes, and considered how they might apply these principles in their own lives to reinforce her point. Jasmine introduced a practical analogy. She compared interpreting statements to assembling a mosaic. Each verified fact, context, detail, and emotional consideration represents a tile. Only when the pieces are assembled thoughtfully does the full picture emerge. Rushing to judgment, ignoring missing pieces, or misplacing tiles can distort the image. Her analogy made the abstract concepts tangible, emphasizing responsibility and care in interpretation. Jasmine then addressed the remaining uncertainties. She acknowledged that some aspects of the Epstein files and related statements would remain undisclosed due to legal or privacy concerns. Rather than seeing this as a barrier, she framed it as a reality of complex public matters. She encouraged the audience to accept uncertainty as part of informed engagement. reminding them that clarity doesn't always mean complete knowledge, but it does mean understanding what is known and what is unknown. The final moments of Part 4 focused on empowerment. Jasmine urged attendees to carry forward the skills they had practiced: careful analysis, perspective-taking, emotional awareness, and social responsibility. She emphasized that these tools aren't limited to one statement or one issue; they apply to everyday life, media consumption, workplace communication, and civic engagement. The room seemed to absorb this message deeply, a collective sense of readiness and clarity replacing earlier tension and speculation. Before concluding, Jasmine offered a reflective pause. She invited the audience to consider how they could apply what they learned, verifying sources, questioning assumptions, and responding with thoughtfulness rather than haste. Her calm, guiding presence left a sense of responsibility paired with confidence. Attendees left not only better equipped to understand Trump's Epstein files statement, but also empowered to engage with any complex information critically and empathetically. Finally, Jasmine summarized the overarching lesson: understanding public statements requires a blend of fact, perspective, and awareness of social impact. Misunderstandings often arise not from malice, but from incomplete comprehension. By embracing clarity, critical thinking, and empathy, individuals can navigate even the most emotionally charged issues with insight and responsibility. The audience left the room with a sense of preparedness, equipped to think clearly, feel responsibly, and communicate effectively in public discourse. Part 4 ended with quiet reflection and subtle energy, signaling the completion of the journey. From facts to perspectives to social implications and practical guidance, Jasmine had transformed a potentially polarizing issue into a structured learning experience. The story concluded not with debate or confrontation, but with clarity, understanding, and actionable insight.